I didn't like Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, if you know me at all, you'll know me as that Spidey fan who hated Homecoming because he was super biased on how it treated his favorite character. And maybe also had reasons for why it just wasn't an interesting movie for him. So, therefore, this take probably isn't a surprise and is just more of a predictable continuation of the Castleman saga. But I do have specific thoughts. I'm planning to split this thing up into 3 sections. Thoughts on it as a movie, thoughts on it as a Spider-Man story, and finally, why me disliking this doesn't really matter. If you disagree with every word in this, that's completely fine. I really wished I could like this movie. Simmering in a vat of pessimism wasn't the way I planned to spend my July. But if you can accept a different opinion, or at least want to hear me out before you shove pitchforks up my ass, we can continue. Full spoilers ahead. The thing is, Far From Home is a marked improvement over Homecoming in regard to technical filmmaking, and I think overall I enjoyed it a little bit more. John Watts got over his hiccups with filming action and has put together some highly impressive battle sequences. There's some long take shots in this movie that were so good, I pumped my fist excitedly. However, that final battle being a boring onslaught of drones was some of the most generic stuff ever, and by far the worst part of the movie. There are only so many ways you can make Spider-Man destroying identical machines interesting, and it went on for way too long. The special effects can get absolutely fantastic at times, with the highlight of the entire film being the extremely cool illusion created by Mysterio in that Berlin warehouse. Speaking of Mysterio, I thought he was overall okay. Doesn't exactly stack up that well to Vulture from Homecoming, but the performance by Jake Gyllenhaal was able to make things stick the landing. The reveal that he was just another guy mad at Tony Stark, however, was an issue. It makes it look like Spider-Man's main dynamic in these movies is going to be cleaning up the trash left behind by Tony. But every single thing about this character has been so tied into Iron Man, I guess they're keeping it consistent at least. But really, I still thought there wasn't really anything much that I could connect with in this movie. The comedy continues to present itself as the main selling point of these MCU Spider-Man movies, and if that's what you come for, you can leave satisfied. Even as jaded as I was, it still got some laughs out of me, though they got super predictable at times. Like, when Ned and Betty randomly got together, I was expecting them to break up for some joke at the end, and guess what happened? If you want something more than surface-level jokes and repetitive bathos, some people may have found something, but I just didn't. The idea of Peter feeling weighted down by the death of Tony Stark is the start of something compelling, but they never went anywhere with it because they just had to keep grinding it back down to, oh, look, here's a funny joke. Another great scene in the movie is the scene where Peter just finally breaks down and just, has like a little crisis about what happened. And Tom Holland completely sells it. He's a great actor, and I really love what he can do. But they never let him just do it enough in these films. At its heart, Far From Home is a harmless little teen romance. Zendaya and Tom Holland have decent chemistry, so I can't really say I had a terrible issue with it. There wasn't really enough conflict for me to get especially invested in it, seeing that we already knew that MJ was into him, and plus she figured out he was Spider-Man without that standing in the way of them getting together, but it was cute, I guess. Except Brad. Brad was the most useless character to ever exist. She never seemed interested in him, so his entire story purpose is pointless. And the scene where Peter almost killed him with a drone just had my eyes rolling out of their skull. This is far from a terrible movie, but why by the end did I just feel utterly exhausted, without any motivation to continue following this version of the character? Well, let's get into that. I think it's fair to split this up because I have a ridiculous attachment to the character of Spider-Man. I've been reading his comics since I was 6, and he's helped me get through some really tough times in my life. But I guess people get angry if I use that to inform my movie opinions, so I'm relegating all of my bitching about this not fitting what attaches me to the character right in this section. Despite my previously mentioned pros to the filmmaking, I just can't get invested in this Peter Parker. It might be that these movies are just engineered in a way that opposes my taste in film, or it might be my connection to the source material. I just don't have any interest in seeing more of these movies. In terms of personality, Peter Parker does act a little bit more like his counterpart in other versions of the source material, and Spider-Man grows more confident and begins to rely on his powers for once. I adored the scene where he embraces his spider sense. It's a godly scene in an otherwise average movie for me. But I just can't call this accurate of anything I grew to love about the character. The most key issue above all others here is everything is so easy. Peter's life is an absolute breeze. He might get beat up as Spider-Man sometimes, but the flow of his personal life is so smooth, so ideal, that it just doesn't connect to me as about this person called Peter Parker. It's just about this trust fund kid who has fun and has powers, and it's nothing more to me than a power fantasy. And I don't think Peter Parker should ever be a power fantasy. Supposedly this is supposed to be a relatable teen movie, but how exactly is this relatable? First off, we have the Aunt May problem, which is a great place to start, seeing it was the awful cliffhanger that Homecoming farted in my face before the credits rolled. Aunt May discovering Peter's identity should be a big deal, and from things that Kevin Feige has said in the past, this would be a thing that would be addressed in Far From Home. But as more trailers came out, I became more and more doubting of that. I even tweeted out, I hate how she's just accepted that he's Spidey without any conflict, which received people screaming at me constantly to stop judging before the movie. Only that in the movie, it's not addressed at all. She's in full and complete support. Not even a scene where she's worried about his safety, it's just sailing on a smooth breeze. You can say, oh, it's 5 years later, like all the replies to my tweet did, but they were both snapped. It's only a year or two for them. It was just a terrible idea to end the first movie on it, and they were simply too lazy to address it going forwards. One more thing on Aunt May. I know I'm a guy, so maybe I'm not the best person to use this term, but isn't it kind of sexist that Aunt May's only purpose in these films is to be hot? Like, they don't make quite as many jokes about it as in Homecoming, but still, her only function in Far From Home is to have a running gag about how she might be dating Happy. Compare this to Aunt May in Spider-Verse, the Raimi trilogy, or even the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Aunt May is a character that those films respect. They give her things to do. Another big issue is that Peter Parker clearly has no money troubles in this universe. Apparently there is a deleted scene where Peter has to sell his Star Wars toys to be able to have money to get a gift for MJ, which shouldn't be a deleted scene. Apparently they cut a lot of the opening for a short film, which explains why the first act is so horrendous. They just don't care about Peter showing struggle. It's not a priority for them. He doesn't have a job, Aunt May isn't showing worrying over bills. That's the fundamental problem of having Tony Stark as such a beneficial figure in Peter's life. You know Tony wouldn't let Peter go poor, so it sucks all the relatability out of it. From everything I've seen in these movies, it looks like Tony Stark just takes care of all of Peter's money issues. I'm sure after he died, he left him and Aunt May some money. It seems like something that Tony Stark would do. And I hate that. It makes Peter so much less interesting when he has a billionaire's tech at his immediate disposal. Yeah, the private jet blows up, but how many more does Happy and have in a warehouse somewhere? The added negative that comes from the Tony Stark connection is the continued forgetting of the existence of Uncle Ben. All the fans kept telling me it would be finally addressed in Far From Home, and it wasn't. Unless you count a suitcase. John Watts did say but behind the scenes that BFP does stand for Uncle Ben, to quote, so Peter's literally carrying the baggage of whatever happened to Uncle Ben with him everywhere he goes. But the thing is, that suitcase blew up. They said so at the end of the movie, that his luggage was destroyed. So, like, generally it just seems John Watts is just spewing word vomit that doesn't have any bearing on the story. Or even worse, it's symbolically representing the destruction of all hope that Ben matters anything to this version of Peter. But I think that's probably too dramatic, because I just don't think John Watts cares. there's still really no consequences to any of his actions in this movie. Because both Ned and MJ now know who he is, they can have ready-made excuses for their classmates when they ask where he is, when he's missing when Spider-Man stuff is going on. It's infuriating. They can have the tiny little unlucky things that happen to him, but none of them are really anything more than tiny inconveniences. You could say there was a consequence from him giving the glasses to Mysterio. But that's just more from Peter being a dumbass and trusting someone he knew for only 2 days. And I just don't even care about what happens after that end credit scene. Yeah, even when they got J.K. Simmons back as Jonah Jameson. You know why? Because in the context built up in these movies, there's very little reason why Peter should care about his secret identity being out. He can easily refute Mysterio's claims of him being responsible for the drone attack, so he can just reveal evidence that he wasn't in possession of it at the time. He can ask security from Happy to help protect Aunt May, and he can just live up the life at high school as a superhero. They've set this up so horrendously that there's absolutely no reason that this should be a problem. Also, why should I care that J.K. Simmons is back? There's no personal connection built up with this Peter. They've never met. They clearly just brought him back for the comedy, which, yeah, J.K. Simmons is hilarious, but in the Raimi films, J. Jonah Jameson actually had an interesting undercurrent to his character that we saw through his interactions with Peter. A highlight example being that when him not giving out Peter's name when the Goblin attacked him. Honestly, if the next thing to happen to this version of the character was a bullet through the brain, I would have a blank expression. They may have done enough for most people to endear them to this version of the character, and that's great. But personally, I just don't care in the slightest about what comes afterwards for Peter. Despite all that, I don't really have the same sinking feeling that I did when I realized I didn't like Homecoming. There were no new Spider-Man media released at that time for me to even remotely care about. But now, I may have gotten heated when writing and recording this review for entertainment's sake, but really, there's no reason for me to get angry or depressed about this. Why? Because in 2018, Dan Slott's 10-year reign of terror over Spider-Man comics came to a blessed end, and the characters have now been taken over by Nick Spencer, a writer who seems far more in touch with what I love about the character, and is doing new and exciting things with it that I can't wait to see continue. Same month, we received Spider-Man PS4, a game that on top of being a fun time swinging and fighting my way around New York, also sought out to tell a compelling and emotional story about Peter Parker, culminating in one of my all-time favorite moments of the character in any of the mediums. And then, in December, we got Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, a revolutionary animated feature that not only paved new ground for the medium it proudly swung about in, but also made me cry with how much it understood what the character was about. I may be done with the MCU's take on Spider-Man, but today, that doesn't mean I have to be done with looking forwards to other new takes. Because of all those things I mentioned, they're either ongoing or have confirmed sequels. And personally, I can't wait. It's worthless to obsess over things that are just going to frustrate you, but it's worth the world to obsess over the things that make life great. I've been Castleman, and that's my take on this whole situation. Please subscribe if you feel sufficiently inclined.